Hello, my name is Ella Jean, your local fantasy author, and today I am hoping to explain how to finally write great villains, because honestly, I'm sick. I'm sick and tired of seeing some of the shitty YA villains. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it usually has something to do with, oh, but he's so handsome. He can't be that evil. He's in the corner, like, murdering people. There are all sorts of villains you can have in a book. You can have, like, the ultimate evil villain, the, like, dark and edgy villain, but that will become an ally later in the book because you watched Avatar: The Last Airbender when you were a child. Actually the protagonist, but they're clearly the villain because you flipped all the messages of everything. Hot, but very evil. And then just plain complicated moral grayness. And honestly, I think any version can actually really be successful depending on the book you are trying to write.
Boo!
And that may be a cop-out answer, but I think it's an important one. We've seen it all, and we've seen it all successfully. There are books that I love, looking at you, Lord of the Rings, where the villain is clearly just this evil motherfucker far off in the land, just doing horrible genocidal shit. Then there's, like, very complicated villains that I like. There's even occasionally dark and brooding villains that I like, aka the Darkling from Shadow and Bone. Depending on the book you are trying to write, you are going to find a different villain fits better. Because honestly, at the end of the day, I think the basic principle of building a villain is looking at the level of morally gray your main character is. A villain should match your protagonist in moral grayness. So the more complicated your main character, looking at an anti-hero that, like, does things for the right reasons but the wrong ways, you should have a complicated villain that does things for the wrong reasons, but it can have positive impacts, and what are we actually talking about, and all of that. I'm going to use my two books as an example. You can actually get Whispers in the Shadows right now. I'm posting it one chapter a week on Patreon if anyone wants to check it out. In Whispers in the Shadows, my main character is morally gray and incredibly complicated. She is lying to everyone in order to save her and her family's life. She is technically participating in a scheme by the villain to take over parts of the world, and is that right? Not really, but it saves her family. She's a thief, she's a liar, she's doing these things for her right reason to protect those she loves, but is that right in the grand scheme of things? She's directly contrasted with a secondary antagonist, who is basically Naya pushed to the extremes, willing to kill, frame, and manipulate those around her in order to, once again, protect her family. How is that more right than what Naya's doing? Even the main villain is villainous in a very industrial colonist way. She's trying to, yes, frame a country for being evil in order to expand her nation. Her people are starving and are struggling with money. And no, I don't think that's right because I clearly put her as my villain. But it's complicated. It's not something that you can just say, oh, that is the ultimate evil, how dare she burn in hell. This all works because Naya is just as complicated. They're all participating in the same scheme. Why is Naya right because she's protecting her family versus the villain who's trying to go all the way? This is all very, 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 very different from For Those Who Seek Magic, which is my younger YA book, where my heroes are kids who have some complication. They're not just flat characters, but they aren't morally gray. They're wanting to, go off on have magical adventures. They're wanting to save their grandmother from a curse. I mean, they aren't evil, and as a result, the villain they're going up against is literally an eldritch deity that wishes to ruin human life. He is trying to kill the main character because she is slightly annoying to him. Yeah, so as a result, the villain is an ultimate evil that kind of just hangs over the entire story. You don't go into too much worry about his whole, he is trying to murder all humans, that sort of shit, because that's not the story it is. It's a story of hope and nostalgia and finding friends and figuring things out, making mistakes, and coming around again. As a result, you have a secondary villain who will end up being a friend by the end of the book, because this sort of book is less focused on the evil. You have some big ultimate thing in the corner. You're aware it exists, it drives the plot. Holy shit, I have a needle in my pants. I just sewed these pants. I'm getting poked. I'm getting poked. Did I sew a needle into the whole situation? God damn it. Needle. The villain is allowed to be in this background just causing issues after issues because there's no need to make him complicated. The story isn't focused on complications, it's on a fight of good and evil. So any time spent with the villain kind of reveals how flat they might be, which makes sense because it isn't a book where you're gonna spend a lot of time with the villain. He's a big bad. Cool. We're good. This really makes things interesting. This is the way to build intrigue and structure into your story, is to have a matching sense between your two big enemies. It works just the same if your protagonist is technically the villain and your antagonist is technically the hero. If you want complications, both should be complicated. For example, books where the main character is supposed to be complicated and morally gray, but the villain is so clearly textbook villain that it removes any real complications from your hero. Your hero, oh, is it good to murder? What if I can't sit in the background and do this? Oh no, I steal sometimes. But the villain they're going against literally, summons big waves of plague that sweeps through nations. And oh no, can I actually kill him? Yeah! You should! It actually makes your hero kind of look stupid. Especially if they're too obsessed with whether or not they truly are a hero. You can make your hero complicated in yes, I have questions. Am I doing the right thing? What is all this sort of stuff I'm supposed to be focusing on? I'm just saying they aren't really going to be morally gray. They aren't going to have moral complications if your villain is this big, huge bad that is causing mass genocide and shit. And super complicated villains with super hope and heroic MCs really just make the MCs more complicated than you think morally, because I'm really talking specifically about superheroes, like Batman killing goons all the time, but then I have to be better than the Joker, because why would I ever kill him? I'll just arrest him and he'll get out soon and kill a whole bunch of more people. So your readers start questioning if your hero really is as heroic as they're supposed to be. And don't get me wrong, that can be a story in its own right. You can acknowledge that. But in acknowledging it, you have to acknowledge that you haven't made a morally hope and light-filled heroic hero, because the acknowledgement is they are shades of gray. So you matched up complicated and complicated again. I don't think this needs to be a conscious effort for everyone. I think I find most good stories just naturally have this. But if it's something you're struggling with, it's a really easy place to start. Looking at your story and who your hero is and trying to match that energy with your villain. Because matching complications and grayness is really what makes a story really fun. Because even at the end of the day, if you have your hot villain who might not truly be evil. He's complicated. If you have a pure hero, he's never actually going to fall in love with the hot villain because he's still a villain and he's not going to care about complications. If you make him fall in love, you're just forcing the plot point. Now, you can focus on other things. You can make them both complicated and go have your little romance in the corner. But they need to both be complicated to do that. And, of course, there is this. As with most writing, this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. The complications don't have to be clear at first. Where we may realize halfway through, oh, this villain that has been this big bad is not as bad as we think it is. And what do we do with this knowledge? Do we just keep fighting? Do we try to talk it out? Do we any of that? That is what makes a good story. You don't need to spell out at first, yes, this villain that so clearly lives in an evil castle, but oh no, is he like saving lives on the side? Yeah, that doesn't need to be spelled out. You can also have stories where halfway through a perfectly heroic hero breaks their code because the villain is complicated, and we explore those complications as a result. The hero seemed like he wasn't morally complicated to start, but changes over time because of what story you have going. Cool. I like it. I also really like stories where you only realize the main character is the villain about halfway through, because the main character is an unreliable narrator. Makes things interesting. The real issue is the lack of complication or amount of complication needs to be acknowledged. If you spend the whole book with this big bad, who's obviously evil, but then your hero is morally complicated and is doing scummy things on the side, you need to address the fact that he's still a grand hero against this such evil. There can be shades, obviously. Anti-heroes and shady allies make stories seem real, but they need to be rooted in a story that makes sense for their character. Because almost every fantasy book is built on the back of the push and pull between hero and villain. Balance between them is what is so important, and is what I'm striving for you to understand. Because that's where we fall in love with the story. Now, this may not be the way you do things. Advice is not one size fits all. I would love to hear examples below of mismatched morals that you've read that have worked out, because I always love learning. But remember, at the end of the day, writing is difficult, and daring to continue past the first page is brave, especially the way the world is. I want to form a community with you, because I truly believe anyone can write, and everyone has a story in them. Thanks.